Have you ever felt ignored or undervalued by your own children? Felt like, despite everything you've done for them, they treat you as if you don't matter? If so, you're not alone. This is one of the most painful experiences for any parent, but today, I want to tell you something important. All is not lost. In this video, we'll explore how Stoicism and practical wisdom can help you radically transform your relationship with your children, even when you feel ignored or disrespected. This isn't about forcing them to change, but about doing something far more powerful, changing from within through your own perception and attitude. When you do this, everything around you can start to change as well. My name is Gabriel, and if this is your first time here, I invite you to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stay until the end, because what you'll discover today can make a profound difference in your life and in your most important relationships. Let's begin. Number 1. The power of detachment without disconnecting love. When you feel ignored or disrespected by your children, the pain can be deep. That emotional distance, that void where there was once closeness, can lead to frustration, sadness, and even resentment. But this is where Stoic detachment becomes a powerful tool. It's not about giving up love or severing ties with them. It's about learning to love without depending on external validation. By practicing detachment, you can keep your love intact while letting go of the need to control how they treat you. One of Stoicism's most powerful ideas is that we cannot control others' actions, but we can control how we respond to them. Epictetus taught this clearly. It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. Your children may act in ways that hurt you, but you have the power to decide what their actions mean to you and how you manage your emotions in response. Detachment isn't coldness or indifference. It doesn't mean withdrawing from your relationship with your children. It means freeing yourself from the pain caused by their attitudes. It's recognizing that their behavior doesn't define your worth or your role as a parent. To keep loving unconditionally without needing immediate reciprocity is one of the greatest expressions of strength and wisdom. Here's an exercise. Imagine that love is like the sun. The sun gives light and warmth without expecting anything in return. It doesn't worry about whether someone appreciates or criticizes it. It just keeps shining because that's its nature. Detachment is learning to be like the sun, continuing to love without being tied to how others receive your light. Jiddu Krishnamurti, a profound thinker and philosopher, said, "Freedom is not in seeking security, freedom is in detachment." In this context, it means your well-being shouldn't depend on your children's acceptance or behavior. Love can flow freely, but it's the need for their validation that you must learn to let go of. You might wonder, how can I love my children without expecting them to treat me with respect? The answer lies in the difference between detachment and disconnection. Detachment is emotionally healthy because it allows you to remain serene, even when your children don't respond as you hope. It's not about stopping your love for them, it's about releasing the suffering caused by unmet expectations. Disconnection, on the other hand, implies emotional withdrawal, which is what we want to avoid. The key lesson here is that the respect and attention you want from your children should not be the foundation of your inner peace. If you base your well-being on others' reactions, you'll always be at the mercy of external factors. But if you learn to love them without expecting a specific response, your emotional stability becomes stronger. And interestingly, when you stop demanding that validation, others, including your children, often start responding differently. Detachment is not a rejection of love. It's an evolution of it. It's loving from a place of freedom without getting trapped in pain when things don't go as expected. This gives you the space to continue being a source of support and light for your children without losing yourself in the process. Because in the end, staying true to yourself with integrity and serenity is what can inspire others, including your children, to see you with newfound respect. Number 2, you don't need to be accepted to be respected. One of the greatest frustrations when you feel ignored or disrespected by your children is the sense that you've lost the place you once held in their lives. And while respect is something we all desire, the key to regaining it isn't in demanding it, but in inspiring it. We often confuse respect with acceptance. We think that to be respected, we first need to be accepted or understood in our choices and way of life. But respect doesn't work that way. Immanuel Kant, one of the great philosophers of the Enlightenment, said, "Self-respect is the cornerstone of all virtue." This is the heart of today's lesson. Respect begins within you. It's not about your children accepting you as you are in order to respect you, but about you living in a way that inspires respect, regardless of whether they agree with you. It's easy to fall into the trap of wanting acceptance from loved ones, especially from our children. We want them to understand our choices, appreciate our sacrifices, and recognize our worth. However, seeking that validation can be a constant source of pain and disappointment. What truly transforms a relationship is when you stop looking for that acceptance and start living with integrity. Your children don't need to agree with you to respect you. They need to see you stand firm in your convictions, living with dignity and serenity. Think for a moment of someone you truly respect, maybe a historical figure, a leader, or someone personal in your life. You don't respect that person because they did what everyone expected of them, but because they were true to themselves, had the courage to live according to their principles, even when others didn't understand. That same power is within you. Your children may not agree with your decisions or even your lifestyle, but if you remain steadfast, if you're consistent in your values and actions, respect will follow. This is where Stoicism provides a crucial tool: inner strength. Respect isn't something to be demanded, nor is it gained by seeking attention. It's earned, but not through control, through your own steadfastness. Seneca said, "Nobility of spirit is shown in how one leads their life, not in others' opinions." If you live with serenity, wisdom, and integrity, you don't need others to validate you because you're already at peace with yourself. Let's take a more practical example. If your children see you maintain calm in difficult situations, not desperate for their attention or approval, they will begin to notice that inner strength. Respect is born from observing how you face life, not from bending to others' demands to be accepted. Your actions speak louder than any words you might say. The way you handle challenging moments is what can ultimately change their perception of you. Sometimes, what causes the lack of respect or disconnection in relationships with children is our attempt to mold ourselves to what we think they want from us, losing sight of who we really are. But when you choose to live authentically, something shifts. You don't need to raise your voice or force uncomfortable conversations to gain their respect. You simply need to be the example of calm and strength that on some level they need to see. The deeper truth is this: you don't need to be accepted to be respected, but you do need to respect yourself for respect from others to find its way back to you. So stop trying to fit into your children's expectations or anyone else's. Live by your own principles, and respect, when you least expect it, will find its way back to you. Number 3, break the cycle of silence with wisdom, not noise. When you feel ignored by your children, the temptation is always the same: to raise your voice, demand attention, or even make reproaches to get them to recognize your value and listen. But what we often don't understand is that noise only creates more noise. Rather than bringing us closer, it drives us further apart. True strength lies in breaking the cycle of silence with wisdom, not with shouting. Silence in relationships can be frustrating and painful. Maybe you feel pushed aside, as if your words no longer carry the same weight in your children's lives. But here, I invite you to view silence from another perspective: conscious silence. The wise person doesn't react impulsively or use noise to be heard. They respond with deep reflection, and most importantly, by example. Lao Tzu, founder of Taoism, said, "Those who know do not speak, and those who speak do not know." This quote reminds us that true power in a relationship isn't in words thrown to the wind, but in the wisdom with which we handle moments of tension. Instead of breaking silence with noise, what if we broke it with a gesture of calm, with an action that shows that, despite feeling ignored, our inner peace remains intact? Let's look at a practical example. Suppose your children have stopped calling or reaching out as they used to. You could confront them with a list of grievances, pointing out how much they've changed or how much their actions hurt. But most likely, this will only create more distance. What if, instead of demanding, you chose to listen when they finally do reach out? What if, rather than forcing communication, you offered spaces of openness and understanding? Noise generates resistance, but wise silence invites dialogue. Stoicism teaches us not to react immediately, to observe before speaking. Epictetus advised, "Remember that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen more than you speak." This doesn't mean remaining completely silent, but waiting for the right moment to act with wisdom. When you choose to break the cycle of silence with a peaceful action, such as an honest conversation at the right time or a selfless gesture of kindness, you can create a much deeper change than any confrontation could. Breaking the cycle of silence doesn't mean forcing a conversation, it means transforming the dynamic. Perhaps your children have ignored you because they feel the dialogue always ends in conflict, or that you don't understand them. If you can show them through your actions and your calm that you're open to a new way of communicating, one that seeks to understand rather than impose, then slowly, the wall of silence will begin to fall. This isn't about passively accepting the silence that hurts you, but about using the pause as an opportunity to strengthen your emotional position and decide how to act wisely. Perhaps, instead of asking why they don't call or visit, you could write a sincere letter, acknowledging your feelings without blame. Maybe that silence could be broken with an unexpected act of kindness or a simple gesture without expectations of an immediate response. Rumi, the great Persian poet, said, "Raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder." This is the essence of breaking silence with wisdom. It's not about how many words you use or how loudly you speak, but the quality of your communication. When your children feel that, despite everything, you remain a source of peace and understanding, respect and dialogue will begin to bloom. So the next time silence settles into your relationship with your children, don't fall into the trap of responding with noise. Break that cycle with wisdom and calm, and you'll see change start to take root not only in them, but also in you. Number 4, change the narrative, change the relationship. One of the biggest obstacles in our relationship with our children isn't always in their actions, but in the story we tell ourselves about those actions. When we feel ignored or disrespected, we often interpret their attitudes through a narrative loaded with assumptions, hurt, and often misunderstandings. This lesson invites you to pause and ask yourself, is what I believe is happening really true, or is it just my interpretation? Buddha, in his teachings on the mind, reminds us, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Often the suffering in our relationships doesn't come directly from what others do, but from how we interpret their actions. Perhaps your child isn't calling as much as they used to, and your mind creates a story. They don't care about me. I don't matter to them. But in reality, the situation may be quite different. Perhaps your child is dealing with their own problems, stressed with work, or even feeling unsure about how to connect with you. The story you tell yourself changes your reality. Changing the narrative means re-examining that internal story to see if it truly aligns with the facts. Think about how we react when we interpret something negatively. If you feel ignored out of disinterest or lack of care, you automatically raise emotional barriers and become more reactive, more distant. But if you could change the narrative and assume that perhaps what's happening isn't rejection, but rather a temporary disconnection, your reaction would be different. A more compassionate narrative can completely change how you approach the relationship. Imagine for a moment that every interaction with your children is like a movie in your mind. You're the screenwriter. If you write the story from a place of hurt, that movie becomes a constant drama. But if you decide to rewrite the script, focusing on understanding and empathy, suddenly the conflict softens and the possibility for dialogue and respect opens up. Stoicism teaches us to question our perceptions. Epictetus said, "It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." This means the key isn't always in changing others, but in changing our interpretation of events. If you can look beyond first impressions and consider other explanations for your children's behavior, you can release unnecessary pain and open yourself to a healthier, less conflicted relationship. Here's a practical example. Suppose your child cancels a planned visit. Your mind might quickly create a story of abandonment. "They're not interested in seeing me. I'm no longer important to them." But what if instead you told yourself a different story? Maybe they're overwhelmed right now, or maybe something urgent came up that has nothing to do with me. This more compassionate narrative reduces unnecessary pain and allows you to respond calmly, keeping the door open for better understanding in the future. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Often, the stories we tell ourselves about others' behavior are colored by our own insecurities or unmet expectations. When your children don't act as you'd hoped, instead of clinging to a narrative of rejection or disregard, look inward and ask yourself, what unmet expectations are fueling this story? In doing so, you can start dismantling assumptions and creating space for a new perspective. Changing the narrative doesn't mean ignoring problems, but rather approaching the relationship from a new angle. Instead of focusing solely on what hurts you, you can start to consider what they, too, might be struggling to express. By changing how you interpret your children's actions, you break the cycle of inner conflict and open a path toward reconciliation, understanding, and ultimately, mutual respect. So the next time you feel ignored or disrespected, before reacting, pause. Ask yourself, what story am I telling myself? Is it really true? Can I tell myself a different version that's more compassionate and less painful? Often, the simple act of re-examining our narrative is enough to transform the entire dynamic of the relationship. If you're finding value in this video so far and discovering new ways to handle your children's disinterest or lack of respect with serenity and wisdom, I invite you to subscribe and hit the like button. It helps me continue creating content that truly adds value for those who, like you, want to improve their relationships and live this stage of life with dignity and inner strength. Stay until the end, because Lesson 7 could completely transform your perspective on how serenity can be your greatest tool for restoring respect and peace in your relationships. Let's continue. Number 5, let go of expectations, start listening. One of the biggest sources of frustration and pain in relationships with our children is unmet expectations. We want them to call more, to care for us as they once did, to value us in the way we believe we deserve. But the truth is, these expectations we build up over the years often end up becoming an emotional trap that distances us from them. The key here isn't to demand more from them, but to learn to listen in a new way, letting go of those expectations that cause us pain. When you cling to an image of how your children should behave, anything that doesn't align with that image causes you pain. But the problem isn't necessarily their behavior. It's the conflict between the expectation you've created and reality. Seneca said, "The greater the expectation, the greater the suffering." This phrase reminds us that the key to living with more serenity and less frustration is in releasing those expectations and opening ourselves up to what is truly happening. This doesn't mean you should settle for less or accept being ignored without reason, but it does mean that by letting go of rigid expectations, you can start to see your children more clearly and honestly. By releasing the inner demands of how they should treat you, you open yourself up to listening to what they actually need and feel. And there, in that openness, is where true connection can begin. Imagine for a moment you're having a conversation with your son or daughter, and instead of expecting an apology, a gesture of affection, or any specific reaction, you decide simply to listen. Listen not only to what they say, but also to what they don't say. Sometimes their silences, evasions, or even their distance are ways of expressing their own struggles. But when we're caught up in our expectations, we miss that. We can't hear them because we're too busy waiting for something that may never come. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher, taught, "Listening with compassion is healing." This means that when you listen without the weight of expectations, you can heal not only the relationship, but also yourself. When we stop expecting our children to behave in a specific way, we begin to discover what they are truly saying through their actions, and that allows us to find new ways to connect. A common example is when children don't communicate as often as we'd like. Maybe we go days, weeks, or even months waiting for a call that never comes. And each day that passes without that call, our unmet expectations turn into resentment. But what would happen if we stopped waiting for that call and simply asked how they were when we do speak? What if, instead of reproaching them for what they haven't done, we genuinely listened with an open heart, without judgment? When we let go of expectations, we give them the space to be themselves without feeling pressured to meet our emotional demands. And that opens the door for them to come to us from a place that's freer, less weighed down by tension. They may not change overnight, but the way they perceive you will shift. You'll no longer be the figure who demands or expects, but someone who's willing to understand. It's also important to remember that in many cases, your children are dealing with their own expectations they believe you have of them. Often, that silence or distance isn't due to a lack of interest, but a fear of not living up to what they think you expect. By letting go of your expectations and starting to truly listen, you allow them to be themselves, without the weight of having to meet a standard. And in that process, you both can find a new way to connect. In the end, letting go of expectations isn't about giving up what you want, but about creating the space for relationships to flourish more authentically. When you free yourself from those inner demands, you create an environment of respect and understanding where the most important thing isn't what your children do or don't do, but how you can be present for them and how they can be present for you. So next time you feel that frustration over what they aren't doing or saying, ask yourself, what expectations am I holding that are causing this pain? Once you identify them, make the conscious effort to release them. Instead of expecting, start listening. You'll see that by doing so, the dynamic will change and respect and closeness will begin to grow naturally. Number 6, compassion begins with understanding their journey. When you feel ignored or disrespected by your children, it's natural to wonder, what did I do wrong? Or why are they treating me like this? Often, our emotions lead us to blame ourselves or to focus solely on the unfairness of the situation. However, an important step toward changing the dynamic is to take a radical turn, to cultivate compassion for them and try to understand their journey, their struggles, and their silences. Compassion isn't about excusing hurtful behavior or allowing yourself to be mistreated. It's a deeper form of emotional connection. By trying to understand the difficulties your children are facing in their own lives, work, emotional, or family issues, you can begin to see their behavior from a new perspective. This doesn't mean their actions are justified, but it does allow you to see beyond the immediate hurt you feel. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote, "When you encounter others' faults, reflect on how you also err. Consider that you, too, are not immune to human weaknesses." This reminder invites us not to focus solely on the grievance we feel, but to remember that everyone, including our children, is grappling with their own weaknesses and challenges. By putting this in perspective, we can approach them with compassion instead of resentment. It's important to distinguish between compassion and self-denial. Being compassionate doesn't mean accepting all treatment passively or overlooking your own pain. It means finding a balance where you acknowledge your emotions but also make room to understand those of others. Perhaps your children are going through stressful times they haven't communicated, or maybe they lack the emotional tools to express what they're feeling without seeming distant or cold. Imagine for a moment that your children are in a stage of life where everything feels overwhelming to them: work, raising their own children, their relationships, or even their personal search for purpose. When we're absorbed in our own struggles, we often lack the emotional energy to be fully present for others, even for those we love. If you can look at the situation through this lens, you may begin to see that their ignoring or distancing from you isn't always a reflection of how they feel about you, but of what they're going through themselves. The Dalai Lama said, "Compassion is the wish for others to be free from suffering." This simple yet powerful teaching invites us to look at our loved ones with the desire to understand what's behind their behaviors. Perhaps they don't know how to express what they're going through. Maybe they think you wouldn't want to hear about their problems, or they might feel their struggles are trivial to you. The key is to open a space where they feel they can be heard, without judgment, without demands. A practical example would be to change how you approach conversations with your children. Instead of asking why they haven't called or why they seem distant, try something simpler. How are you really doing? Is there something on your mind? By doing this, you shift the dynamic of the interaction from one of demand to one of empathy. Remember, compassion doesn't always mean intervening or solving their problems. It's often simply about being there to listen. Sometimes, what they need most is to know they have a safe space where they can be themselves without being judged. And interestingly, when you offer that space of understanding, they also start to see you differently. Stoicism teaches us to accept what we cannot control, but also to be a source of stability and calm for others. Your children, even if they don't always show it, still look to you for support and wisdom. By cultivating compassion and striving to understand their journeys, you offer just that, a calm in the middle of their storms, a reminder that respect and love can always be rebuilt when there's willingness and empathy on both sides. So the next time you feel ignored or misunderstood, pause and ask yourself, what might be happening in their lives that I'm not seeing? Open the door to compassion, and you'll see that while change may not be immediate, something in the relationship begins to soften. Compassion starts by understanding their journey, and that understanding can be the first step toward reconnection. Number 7, serenity is your final answer. When emotional conflicts with your children become constant, and you feel that respect or closeness is no longer there, it may seem like there's little you can do to change the situation. But in reality, there is a powerful tool that's always within your control. Serenity. Cultivating a calm mind not only transforms your inner experience, but also has the potential to shift the relationship dynamic. Stoicism reminds us that while we cannot control others, we can control our response to what happens. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed." This phrase captures one of the greatest powers we possess, the ability to decide how circumstances affect us. Your children may act in ways that hurt you, but the peace and serenity you cultivate within yourself remain unshakable if you choose to keep them so. Serenity isn't resignation, nor is it passivity. It's an active stance you choose to take in life. It's understanding that although you can't change how your children treat you or force them to respect you the way you want, you can remain grounded in your inner peace. That peace, in turn, can become an anchor that draws them closer to you. Often, when we try to control or correct others' behavior, we only create more friction. But when we remain serene, we reflect a type of strength that's impossible to ignore. Imagine your children as the wind, sometimes gentle and warm, sometimes stormy and cold. If you're a ship, constantly carried by every change in the wind, you'll end up exhausted, drifting aimlessly. But if you're a lighthouse, steady and calm, you shine even in the midst of the storm. Serenity is your anchor. Even when everything around you feels chaotic, you can stand firm in your calm, projecting wisdom and strength from that place. The great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu taught, "The best fight is not to fight." This doesn't mean you should give up on your relationship with your children or accept any behavior. It means that instead of exhausting yourself emotionally with every conflict, you choose not to engage in unnecessary battles. When you stay calm, you become a living example of how to live with dignity and respect without needing to force anything. A practical example of this is how you respond when you feel ignored. Instead of reacting with frustration or anger, practice the art of the pause. Breathe, take a moment, and reflect on what's truly happening. Will your response help solve the situation, or will it only add to the conflict? In that moment of pause, you regain control over your emotions, allowing you to act with wisdom instead of impulsivity. Serenity not only changes how you feel, it also changes how others see you. Your children, even if they don't say it, will notice your calmness. And that serenity, that inner peace you radiate, can be a light that eventually guides them back to you. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the way you expect, but serenity has an energy that's hard to ignore. It shows strength without words. The great psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Serenity gives you that space, that freedom to choose how you will respond to what your children do or don't do. In the end, being serene doesn't mean you won't feel pain or sadness when things don't go as you wish, but it does mean you choose not to be trapped by that pain. It means you decide that your inner peace doesn't depend on others' actions, but on how you choose to live your life, and that is the greatest respect you can give yourself. So when you feel ignored, disrespected, or that the relationship isn't what it used to be, remember that serenity is your greatest tool. You don't need to win every emotional battle to live a full and dignified life. By staying serene, you not only find peace within yourself, but also create a space where the relationship, little by little, can begin to heal. Because in the midst of any storm, calmness always finds its way. Our relationship with our children is one of the deepest and, at times, most complex bonds of our lives. Feeling ignored or disrespected can be devastating, but it's not the end of the road. As we've discussed today, change doesn't begin by trying to force them to act a certain way. but by working on your own peace, wisdom, and inner strength. Detachment, compassion, and serenity are powerful tools that allow you to live with dignity and, in turn, project the kind of respect you wish to see in the world, starting with your own children. Remember, you don't need to be accepted to be respected. You don't need to enter every emotional battle. Change begins with you, and when you remain serene, wise, and true to your integrity, the relationship has a chance to transform. My name is Gabriel, and if this is your first time on the channel, I invite you to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the upcoming topics we'll be exploring. If you've made it this far, it means you truly value your personal growth, and that deserves recognition. To know who's committed and stayed until the end, comment the phrase, "I am Stoic." And let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to hear from you, to know which country you're tuning in from and who's with me on this journey of self-discovery. And don't leave without sharing this video with your loved ones. Perhaps someone in your life needs to hear these words today and find a new perspective. Sometimes, a small piece of advice can make a big difference. See you in the next video.